Hi, that's a little bit different way to begin, isn't it? Welcome to Storytime with Stuart. It's good to see you again. I hope you've had a good night's sleep last night, maybe tonight also. So today we're going to read chapter 4 from Winnie the Pooh. Yesterday we read chapter 3. For some of you, this might be your first chapter book. It's a book with more words than pictures, and it tells a story. Okay? In Winnie the Pooh, each chapter is kind of its own little story. But through all of the chapters, you're learning about the the people and animals that live in the 100-Acre Wood, which is where Christopher Robin goes to play. Okay. Now today I've marked my chapter with a bookmark. You want to take care of your books so you don't bend down pages or do things like that. You stick in just a little thin something. Look at here. My bookmark is a picture of Winnie the Pooh with honey. What do you think? Huh? Chapter 4 of Winnie the Pooh by A. Milne, illustrated. Remember, they use the word, say it's decorated by, but we call that an illustrator, Ernest H. Shepard. Okay, and he's got some really nice drawings in here. Chapter 4, in which Eeyore loses a tail and Pooh finds one. The old gray donkey Eeyore stood by himself in a thirsty corner of the forest, his front feet well apart, his head on one side, and thought about things. Sometimes he thought sadly to himself, "Why?" And sometimes he thought, "Wherefore?" And sometimes he thought, "Inasmuch which?" And sometimes he didn't quite know what he was thinking. So when Winnie the Pooh came stumping along, Eeyore was very glad to be able to stop thinking for a little in order to say, "How do you do?" in a gloomy manner to him. In a gloomy manner. "How do you do?" So here's Eeyore just standing all alone. Okay. And there's Winnie the Pooh coming up. "And how are you?" said Winnie the Pooh. Eeyore shook his head from side to side. "Not very how. I don't seem to have felt at all how for a long time." "Dear, dear," said Pooh, "I'm sorry about that. Let's have a look at you." So Eeyore stood there, gazing sadly at the ground, and Winnie the Pooh walked all around him once. "Why, what happened to your tail?" Winnie the Pooh said in surprise. "What's happened to it?" said Eeyore. "It isn't there." "Are you sure?" "Well, either a tail is there or it isn't there. You can't make a mistake about it, and yours isn't there." "Then what is?" "Nothing." "Let's have a look," said Eeyore, and he turned slowly around to the place where his tail had been a little while ago, and then finding that he couldn't catch it up, he turned around the other way until he came back to where he was at first, and then he put his head down and looked between his front legs, and at last he said, with a long sad sigh, "I believe you're right." Here he is trying to look behind him. You can't see behind yourself, can you, without a mirror? "Of course I'm right," said Pooh. "That accounts for a good deal," said Eeyore gloomily. "It explains everything. No wonder." "You must have left it somewhere," said Winnie the Pooh. "Somebody must have taken it," said Eeyore. "How like them," he added after a long silence. Pooh felt that he ought to say something helpful about it, but he didn't quite know what, so he decided to do something helpful instead. "Eeyore," he said solemnly, "I, Winnie the Pooh, will find your tail for you." "Thank you, Pooh," answered Eeyore. "You're a real friend." "And," said he, "not like some," he said. So Winnie the Pooh went off to find Eeyore's tail. It was a fine spring morning in the forest as he started out. Little soft clouds played happily in the blue sky, skipping from time to time in front of the sun as if they'd come to put it out, and then sliding away suddenly so that the next might have his turn. Through them and between them the sun shone bravely, and a copse which had worn its furs all the year round seemed old and dowdy now beside the new green lace which the beeches had put out. Through the copse and spinney marched Bear, down open slopes of gorse and heather, over rocky beds of streams, up steep banks of sandstone, into the heather again, and so at last, tired and hungry, to the 100-Acre Wood, for it was in the 100-Acre Wood that Owl lived. Maybe we're going to get to meet Owl. And if anyone knows anything about anything, said Bear to himself, it's Owl who knows something about something, he said. Or my name's not Winnie the Pooh, which it is. So there you are. Owl lived at the Chestnut, an old world residence of great charm, which was grander than anybody else's, or seemed so to be to Bear, because it had both a knocker and a bell pull. Underneath the knocker, there was a notice which said, "Please ring if an answer is required." Underneath the bell pull, there was a notice which said, "Please knock if an answer is not required." These notices had been written by Christopher Robin, who was the only one in the forest who could spell. For Owl, wise though he was in many ways, able to read and write and spell his own names, yet somehow went all to pieces over delicate words like measles and buttered toast. So here's Owl's chestnut tree. Okay. And see the notices up there? And they're spelled poorly because Christopher Robin is very young and he's just learning to spell and to write. Winnie the Pooh read the two notices very carefully, first from left to right, and afterwards, in case he'd missed some of it, from right to left. Then, to make quite sure, he knocked and pulled the knocker, and he pulled and knocked the bell rope. And he called out in a very loud voice, "Owl, I require an answer. It's Bear speaking." The door opened. Owl looked out. "Hello. Let's get an owl voice. Hello, Pooh. How's things?" "Terrible," said Winnie the Pooh, "because Eeyore, who's a friend of mine, has lost his tail, and he's moping about it. So would you very kindly tell me how to find it for him?" "Well, the customary procedure in such cases is as follows." "What does customony proceedcake mean?" said Pooh, "for I'm a bear of very little brain, and long words bother me." "It means the thing to do." "As long as it means that, I don't mind," said Pooh. "The first thing to do is follows. First, issue a reward. Then—" "Just a moment," said Pooh, holding up his paw. "What do we do to this? What were you saying? You sneezed just as you were going to tell me." "I didn't sneeze." "Yes, you did, Owl." "Excuse me, Pooh, I didn't. You can't sneeze without knowing it." "Well, you can't know it without something having been sneezed." "What I said was, first, issue a reward." "You're doing it again." "A reward," said Owl very loudly. "We write a notice to say that we will give a large sum to anybody who finds Eeyore's tail." I see," said Pooh, nodding his head. "Talking about large somethings," he went on dreamily, "I generally have a small something about now, about this time in the morning." He looked wistfully at the cupboards in the corner of Owl's parlor. "Just a mouthful of condensed milk or what not, with perhaps a lick of honey." "Well, then," said Owl, "we write this notice and we put it up all over the forest." "A lick of honey," murmured Bear to himself, or not, as the case may be," and he gave a deep sigh, and tried very hard to listen to what Owl was saying. But Owl went on, using longer and longer and longer words, until at last he came back to where he started, and explained that the person to write out this notice was Christopher Robin. "It was he who wrote the first one on my front door. Did you see them, Pooh?" For some time now, Pooh had been saying yes and no in turn, with his eyes shut to all that Owl was saying, and having said yes, yes, last time, he said no, not at all, now without really knowing what Owl was talking about. There's Pooh sitting there thinking about something to eat, and Owl's trying to tell him everything that's going on. "Didn't you see them?" said Owl, a little surprised. "Come and look at them now." So they went outside, and Pooh looked at the knocker and the notice below it. He looked at the bell rope and the notice below it. And the more he looked at the bell rope, the more he felt that he had seen something like it somewhere else, somewhere before. "Handsome bell rope, isn't it?" said Owl. Pooh nodded. "It reminds me of something," he said, "but I can't think of what. Where'd you get that?" "I just came across it in the forest. It was hanging over a bush. I thought at first somebody lived there, so I rang it, and nothing happened. Then I rang it again very loudly, and it came off in my hand." Can you see the bell rope right there? Here, go right there. What's that look like? Do you know? I think I might know. And nobody seemed to want it. I took it home and... Owl, said Pooh solemnly, you made a mistake. Somebody did want it. Who? Eeyore, my dear friend Eeyore. He was fond of it. Fond of it? Attached to it, said Winnie the Pooh. So with these words he unhooked it and carried it back to Eeyore. And when Christopher Robin had nailed it on in its right place again, Eeyore frisked about the forest, waving his tail so happily, that Winnie the Pooh came over all funny and had to hurry home for a little snack of something to sustain him. And wiping his mouth half an hour afterwards, he sang to himself proudly, Who found the tail? I found the tail at 11:45. I found the tail. Only really it was 11:45, but it didn't rhyme. See how happy Eeyore is? And Eeyore is very rarely happy. So if you lost your tail and you got it back, you'd be very happy too, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. But I don't think I'd be happy if Christopher Robin nailed it back in place. Do you? Hmm. So I'm going to turn the page to the beginning of chapter 5, and I'm going to take my bookmark here, and my Winnie the Pooh bookmark, and I'm going to put it back in my book here. So next time we come to read, we'll know right where to begin. Be kind and stay safe.